Thank you very much. You can be seated. Sorry for my delay, but I was talking to the court administration. That I will be reassigned here next week, so we do intend to just continue until the case is over. So we make plans accordingly, and those will be firmed up hopefully tomorrow. But it doesn't, we will be able to finish next week. All right. You ready to call your next witness?
Anderson County calls Cindy Wilson.
All right. Look forward to be sworn, please, in the center.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear affirm testimony you'll give the court today in this case to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If you would take a witness stand, please, ma'am, and state your name for the record, and spell your last name for the report.
My name is Mary Cindy Wilson. I go by Cindy Wilson.
The witness, counsel.
Good afternoon, Ms. Wilson.
Good afternoon.
Where do you currently reside?
129 Steeplechase, Belton.
And what do you do for a living?
Well, it's a little hard these days, but I'm a real estate broker and a farmer.
And where did you go to school?
I finished at Hannah High School here, and then I finished at USC in Columbia.
Are you currently a member of Anderson County Council?
I am.
How long have you been a member of the county council?
I was sworn in January 2001.
And you've served ever since continuously?
I have.
How would you describe the political environment in Anderson County leading up to November 2008?
Do you need a long explanation? It was a very challenging time.
And perhaps in general terms, I'll get into specifics later, but in general terms, what made it so difficult?
There was a very difficult environment. From the moment I came in 2001, I had difficulty being provided financial reports, particularly in a timely manner, getting answers to questions that were necessary. There were, I believe, morale issues among county employees. I believe that there was a lack of leadership from the top, and there was just great turmoil. Our citizens were quite angry with us. They had had a major tax increase a few years before, and they didn't think that we were spending their money wisely.
Did you have concerns about the administrator?
I did.
Can you describe those concerns?
Well, first of all, I did write asking who was minding the store, because there were lots of transfers from one item to another that were showing up. The general ledger reports indicated what to me appeared to be wasteful, questionable spending. There was just a litany of concerns. I felt like there were some personnel issues too.
You mentioned financial issues. How would you describe the finances of Anderson County as transparent?
No.
Can you describe to me why you felt that it was not?
Well, I had difficulty getting the forms. I would find the credit card expenditures, and when I finally did get to see some of the credit card billing statements, I had identified what appeared to be 23 separate credit cards. I had been requesting to see those statements, and it appeared that the funds were being spent numerous times on meals and other questionable ways. It didn't seem to match what our policies were. There would be no backup and no explanation. We couldn't get explanations.
It appeared to you that the credit cards were being used for improper reasons? Is that what you're saying?
Well, we had a per diem and credit card policy, and it wasn't met. Frequently, credit card usage exceeded per diem. And we had massive amounts of money going to consultants and legal. Some of the infrastructure cost appeared to be over what would have seemed to be proper or reasonable.
Are you referring to blanket invoices?
That was one of the things that troubled me greatly, that we were
Can you describe
using
that?
blanket invoices for engineering. And what caught my attention most was the Michelin project. Of course, we had to have a road to access a major industry, but it went all over the place. The invoices would frequently say blanket invoice, no specific project. And then I found one invoice in particular that caught my eye was one that was, I think it was about $256,000 paid to BP Barber engineering firm. And I took it to a local engineering company and showed it to one of the engineers, and I asked him if that looked appropriate. It seems like it was for staking out, observing construction, and certain linear footage.
Your Honor, Mayor,
It turned out that he was the sole contractor.
I think she's still answering the question. Ma'am, try to keep your answers to the question asked, and let's not meander too much at all possible.
Yes.
He's entitled to hear your attorney ask specific questions on specific issues. I'll let you complete your answer.
We had legal costs that were running plus or minus $1 million a year. We had a tremendous amount of bond debt that was being dumped onto us, $28 to $29 million in the last 6-7 months of the calendar year. There were projects that were questionable. For example, there was a Broadway Lake Pavilion that, to my mind, and a lot of others, did not need to be replaced. Cost
Your
of
Honor,
Yes.
same narrative. I mean, is this the same first question?
What was the question?
I had asked her about her concerns and how the finances were being managed in Anderson County. And her concerns, I believe, are numerous, and she has many things to testify about.
And that's the objection. It calls for a narrative. That question called for a narrative, and we're getting the narrative.
Well, I can try to be
Why
more
don't you ask
specific.
specific
I'll be
questions?
more
And that
specific.
gives him an opportunity, if he thinks something is objectionable in what's coming up, to make an objection.
Certainly.
We can manage it. Thank you, ma'am.
When you mentioned blanket invoices for projects, what do you mean? What do you mean by a blanket invoice? What was your specific concern about that?
I learned from reviewing blanket invoices typically are used for bulk purchases like paper clips, pens, etc. It would not seem to be an appropriate way to handle a consulting or an engineering type expense.
Do you mean that it was it indicated a purchase for a large amount, but there was no line item differentiation?
No.
And so you couldn't really tell what the money was spent on? Is that your concern?
That was the concern.
Okay. And you mentioned, I think you mentioned transfers of money between accounts as one of your financial concerns. Can you describe that a little bit more?
There were lots of transfers. The fiscal year in Anderson County would begin with a new budget, but from that time until books closed, there would be millions of dollars in transfers. What particularly disturbed me would be the transfers that would be made after the June 30th end of the year.
Tell me about the procurement and dispersal procedures. Was anything about those that concerned you?
Many. There was no adherence to my eye of following the procurement code. Many very valuable assets, to my way of thinking, for the county were sold very low without benefit of public competitive bidding procedures. There were other properties purchased that council wouldn't even know about till months later. And
Is this going to be just like a bunch of narrative passages, or are we going to have an actual question?
She's being responsive to that question. Overruled. Go ahead, answer the question.
You were, I'm sorry, Ms. Wilson, I
there
believe you were
didn't
talking
seem
about.
to be, in fact, I even asked at one council meeting sometime early on if we bid out consulting and engineering cost and legal cost. And our administrator at that time responded that he chose who he thought was best.
You mentioned you had some concerns about property transactions. Is
Yes.
that right? And was there an appearance of any kind of favoritism going
Well,
on?
there was at least one broker who seemed to get a lot of business, and a councilman who was getting business.
And who were they? Friends or associates?
Is this all relevant to the service agreement case, or?
Relevance, I don't know. I assume we're going to be talking about Councilman Bean, but I don't know.
Yes, I'll tell you exactly what I'm doing. Your Honor. I'm just asking Ms. Wilson what her concerns were about the administrator, about the county. There's been a lot of testimony about inquiries and investigations that she's done. And I just want her to be able to testify reasons for her interest in investigating the finances of the county and other matters. And so I think this is relevant to explain.
We don't want to go into
Your Honor, my only exception, purpose of the record is this. Over the past 11 years, it's been a moving target. It's one thing after another. And so if we're going to have, and that was part of the reason why I had a motion for eliminating about stray allegations, because what's going to happen is we're going to have this big long narrative. I won't have a chance. It's going to come out of nowhere. It's going to be like, well, and he did this, and this. And so what's going to happen is going to be this long, big thing that's going to go in the record that I'm going to have to go back now, and it's not in the pleadings, and I'm going to have to go find and ferret the proof to respond to all this stuff and disprove it. And so that's my problem, and it's particularly troubling when it comes in narrative form like that, where it's just coming in as going like, well, there were these like 5 guys, Bobby, Billy, Johnny, Jimmy, and Johnny, and they all got commissions, and I didn't like that. Well, there's no way I can defend the case when you're just dumping stuff in the record. And so my objection is that there is a question and answer form of interrogation contemplated by the rules of evidence, and they should have to adhere to it.
Thank you, Your Honor. We're not adding any claims to our complaint. We're not adding any claims to this case. I'm merely giving Ms. Wilson the opportunity to explain what concerns she had about the administrator that led to some difficulties in 2008, and we've heard a lot of testimony.
I understand where you're going, and I'm going to allow you to go there. I'm trying to keep this case from mushrooming any more than it is already mushroomed.
Yes, Your Honor.
Do you know what I mean by saying that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Ms. Wilson, were you aware of, did you have any concerns about expensive or unnecessary travel by individual council members?
I did.
Was there anyone in particular that stands out in mind?
Mr. McAfee's travel.
Did his travel, did reimbursements for his travel remain within the per diem limits?
No.
Do per diem limits apply to council members?
I would have thought so. I had to adhere to one.
You believe that they apply to you? Did Mr. McAfee travel alone?
No, he had a business associate and in several instances it appeared a business client.
Were their expenses reimbursed by the county as well?
Yes.
Do you think that the travel he was doing with his business partner and his, at times, client had any concrete economic benefit to the county?
I would question that. It certainly did improve his chances of a commission.
Have you ever submitted a request for reimbursement to the administrator and had him deny it?
Yes.
So his approval of your reimbursements for council members, would you say that his reimbursement is automatic or ministerial?
No. Shall I explain, or do you want to continue?
It's fine, I think, thank you.
I did put in for a request to be reimbursed, and it was denied.
Did you, were you concerned about any favoritism in terms of contracts that were